Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a little while since I've been able to get on to do a podcast here from the WWDNYK studios. This is Dr. James Lyons-Weiler coming to you live from WWDNYK on another episode of Unbreaking Science. Today's topic is going to be PEG sensitivity, whether we're going to uh, see any effort whatsoever to address this problem. I've called some time ago now, uh, for some screening, some understanding that PEG sensitivity is a real problem. I'm not the only voice, of course. We have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his team calling for similar action to make sure that those people who have PEG sensitivity are not confronted with another round of anaphylaxis if they've already shown sensitivity to it. And so I have a guest today, a person that is intimately familiar with this problem. His name is Harold Gielow. Harold, thanks for being on Unbreaking Science. How are you, sir?
My pleasure. Very well.
Right. So why don't you tell the listeners and the viewers about your personal experience and how you came to be aware of PEG sensitivity?
So up front, what people need to realize that have a hypersensitivity to something they haven't identified, that's typical of people that have a reaction to PEG because PEG is in a broad range of products, and so it becomes difficult to identify what's actually causing your allergy. So I started having a sensitivity to an unidentified product when I was in the service. And I had several episodes then. And then after I retired, as I was getting older and colon cancer runs in my family, I, of course, started getting colonoscopies or attempted to. So the first preparation I got was Miralax. And I came home, I drank the first glass, and within seconds, I was starting to get itching and urticaria, rashes throughout my body. And within a little more than a minute, I was in severe anaphylactic shock and had to be rushed to the hospital and be administered epinephrine. So when I got back from that experience, I said, "This is not something to fool with. I need to figure out what this is." And so I looked at the ingredients of the prep that I took, and I looked at the ingredients of things that I'd known I had contact reactions to in the past. And I said, I think the culprit's PEG. And I spoke to some people about that. They said, I've never heard of such. And I had a doctor friend of mine that had a contact at Johns Hopkins. The contact was Dr. Atkinson, who works in the allergy and immunology department at Johns Hopkins. And I went up there, scheduled myself for a skin test. And lo and behold, he said, yes, you are highly allergic to PEG, avoid it at all costs. And that started my journey of discovery on how to avoid PEG and how severe the condition is and prevalent, perhaps, in a lot more people than we suspect. So polyethylene glycol is ubiquitous, is the word that's often used. It's everywhere. It's in cosmetic products, it's in food, it's in medicines. I had ruptured my quadriceps tendon and was searching for a doctor to do the repair. And I explained to them I needed to have a PEG-free environment. They said, well, sorry, I can't do you. So here I was with a ruptured quadriceps tendon. And I called some major hospitals and they said, we don't have a PEG-free environment to do this for you. And I found a saint of a doctor that said, I'll do the research myself. And when he did, he found that the orthopedic screws that he had intended to use, as well as the sutures he had intended to use, were coated with polyethylene glycol to prevent bacterial adhesion. So he finally called me up and said, yeah, I'll do your surgery, but I'm going to have to modify the way I was going to do it because I can't use the products that I intended to use on you. So one, if you have an acute sensitivity to something, you can't identify what it is, then suspect PEG or get tested for PEG. Two, it's very difficult to avoid, so you have to do your own research. A lot of doctors are not even aware of this sensitivity, and they're surprised when they hear about it. I've had, even after I've informed doctors that I'm sensitive to PEG and I've been tested, I've still been prescribed medications that have PEG in it. So you have to be your own doctor. Third, when you're being your own doctor, you have to realize that PEG goes by many different names. It's not standardized, which makes it even more difficult. It's called Carbowax, Macrogol, polyethylene glycol, polyethylene oxide. And I've seen sites that list like 20, 30 different names of polyethylene glycol. So
Sure.
it's very difficult to just, to avoid because of that as well. Ubiquity, non-standard naming convention, and lack of awareness in the medical community. So just recently, obviously with the pandemic, I became very concerned if I could get the vaccine, for the worst pandemic supposedly we've had since 1918 pandemic. So I started digging into the vaccines, and lo and behold, Moderna's and Pfizer's vaccine uses methoxypeg 2000, which is a fairly high molecular weight peg, contraindicating my taking of those vaccines. And in my research, and I'll say this one more thing, then I'll shut up. I found, quite to my surprise, and to the surprise of the people that were doing the study, that 72% of the U.S. population has anti-PEG antibodies. Now, that doesn't mean 72% of the population will have my experience, but they have an immune response to PEG. So here we were spending billions of dollars to introduce vaccines population-wide that 7 out of 10 people at a minimum had an allergic response to the vaccine itself, which shocked me and worried me. And that's why I started trying to call people in government, people in regulatory agencies, and just searching for somebody to warn them that this could be a problem. I wasn't assuming people were doing this willfully and negligently. I was just assuming people didn't know. So I called as many people as I could to warn them. I wrote information to ACIP, called all of my representatives, and frankly, I got no response until I contacted Children's Health Defense, and they looked at the information I sent them, thought it had merit, and started to help me.
Yeah, great. So in addition to the 70% or 72% that have antibodies, there's about 8% that have extreme reaction. So the
That's correct.
actual, right, so the actual hypersensitivity is fairly prevalent to have 8% of people. If they're going to vaccinate 100 million people, and 8% of 100 million is a huge number of people that could potentially have a serious problem. What was the reaction to, did you get any responses from any of the regulatory agencies at all?
I got one response, and forgive me, I can't remember which acronym agency this was, but it's one that was set up to enhance the distribution of the vaccines and acceptance, CDC. That type of thing.
Yeah.
It was set up by CDC, but it's another organization within CDC. And I got online because they have a question and answer type blog there, and I sent them a question about the mitigation to the risk that the vaccine producers were doing, knowing that 72% of the population has anti-PEG antibodies. And they sent the question to Moderna, and Moderna answered. And they said, we're not taking any mitigation to hypothetical. So they called it hypothetical when the science has proven that there's a large body of the population that has a sensitivity.
Right, absolutely. So, if it's hypothetical at this point in time to them, but it's very real to you. I mean, you had serious reactions, so it's hardly hypothetical. What do you think is going to happen if after 100 million or 200 million people are injected with PEG? Not just the first dose or the second dose, but then in 8 months' time, a booster, and then next year, another couple of boosters. And, over time, what do you think is going to happen to PEG sensitivity in the United States?
Well, I don't think you have to be a scientist to understand that when you're exposed to something that's an antigen foreign to your body's going to react to it. So if we already have 72%, and I would say that 72% of the study is probably a lowball estimate because they used blood samples from 1990 to 2000. So they were showing that the incidence of anti-PEG sensitivities was growing over time. So now we had another decade at least, so they've probably gotten higher, closer to 80%. But as we do a population exposure, you're going to increase the number of people that are allergic to it, and the sensitivity degree increases with the exposure. So if you have a booster, your sensitivity, your reaction is probably going to be enhanced from the first time you got it.
And in the meantime, people are using PEG products all over the place. And that's, it's not as though the vaccines are given in a silo. The people who are vaccinated who develop hypersensitivity will run into PEG in other products, such as um, the suppositories and other things like that that people use and the cosmetics. I'm pretty good at math, and I did a little bit of an analysis in preparation for this to try. I asked the following question: at what rate would vaccination have to increase PEG sensitivity, hypersensitivity, beyond the normal rate that's already happening because we have two data points. If you assume a linear extrapolation from the 1970s through the mid 1990s, you have a certain rate of increase. At what additional rate of increase would vaccines have to increase PEG sensitivity before we see widespread over 90% sensitivity in the vaccinated American public within 1 year? And the answer is 2.9. So if it increases the rate 2.9 fold, if it does a 290% increase, then we'll see 100% PEG sensitivity if everybody's capable of having PEG sensitivity in the vaccinated. So that's an empirical that's a theoretical projection. The empirical data then become, all right, we need to start screening people for PEG antibodies in the vaccinated in anticipation so that we can estimate what percentage increase is actually happening. Because eventually, if it doesn't happen in a year, it could happen in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. Eventually, the vaccines will become useless. No one can take the vaccine without requiring an EpiPen. What are the health? Do you know the health consequences of having multiple anaphylaxis events and EpiPen recovery? Do you know anything about that?
I know that severe anaphylaxis, in my case, is so rapid, unless it's anticipated in the environment that you're getting exposed, then in my case, I would probably die. I have to get immediate treatment. I pass out within close to a minute. The last time this happened to me, my family physician, God bless her soul, she gave me a steroid shot for an inflammation condition. Neither she or I checked the package insert, and immediately I went into anaphylaxis, lost consciousness, and she could not find a pulse in my carotid artery. So they gave me an EpiPen and got the hospital to come out with the ambulance.
I've given one.
So it's not only the exposure to the vaccine, although that is a population level exposure. Some other things that are being done with products, and I'm not going to mention the name because I don't know this is going to be a problem, but I suspect that it might be and it needs to be further looked into. There are virucides that are being put out that's already approved for emergency use in Georgia and Tennessee that take triethylene glycol and put it in the HVAC system and spread it throughout the restaurant, building, office, doctor's offices, dental offices. Yeah. And that is exposing population on a chronic basis to PEG. Now, people will argue triethylene glycol is not PEG, but it is PEG. It's just a low molecular weight PEG. And there are articles and concerns that have been voiced that exposure to low molecular weight PEGs could cause the hypersensitivity to higher molecular weight PEGs.
Right. So as the vaccines become more commonly used, and as the PEG sensitivity as a result increases, and other products that are out there also increases, if I were an investor in Moderna or Pfizer, I would be pretty concerned that perhaps this product is going to put itself out of utility, right? So there's this very serious medical concern. As for instance, did a little bit of research into it. If you have multiple bouts of anaphylaxis, you are jacking your immune system in a very serious manner. You're jacking the tissues of your body. But then if you do multiple EpiPen recoveries, you're actually at high risk of exacerbating diabetes. Very, very bad. You get a huge spike in your blood sugar. It doesn't seem to be able to recover as well because you get more of an onset of an autoimmune condition in your pancreas. And so there are attendant health consequences to EpiPens. Whereas the medical community seems to think, don't worry about anaphylaxis. You're in the hospital setting. There's an EpiPen on the wall. We've got your back. But they never think about the attendant. They externalize the costs of things that happen through that medical procedure. Having an anaphylaxis reaction is by no means trivial. They treat it as though it's trivial. And so at what point in time are they going to say, you know what, we're creating the problem here? Do you see any industry shifting away from pegs due to concerns like yours?
I was on a phone conversation with a gentleman that is in the pharmaceutical industry. He wouldn't reveal what company he's with, but they were trying to get approved a alternative to PEG. Um, Poly 2-oxazoline was one of them, and there are multiple alternatives that have been proposed for PEG. The problem is PEG is so widely used in the industry and in the pharmaceutical industry, it would cost them billions to rewicker all their products, both the ones that are currently there, plus the ones that are investigational new drugs, because PEG is used heavily in a lot of DNA therapies. So I don't see, unless they're pushed, the pharmaceutical industry recognizing this problem and doing anything about it, because they already know it's a problem. I mean, even if the percentage didn't get above 7 out of 10 in our population, it's shocking to me that knowing that, and I know they knew it because Moderna scientists wrote about the problem and the risk, and their businessmen wrote about the risk in their SEC filings. So it's not that they didn't know. I know they knew. Knowing that 7 out of 10 people are allergic to your vaccine product, if I were an investor, I would be selling very quickly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So while the vaccines are liability free, you can't sue the vaccine manufacturers. There's nothing protecting other PEG products, manufacturers of PEG products from liability to PEG sensitivity. So the other product makers, the manufacturers that make things like the screws you talked about, or the digestive aids or whatever it is that people are exposed, cosmetics, they're not protected from liability if a person has an anaphylaxis. And I would encourage people, if you do have anaphylaxis, to peg, to try to tie it together. If you've been vaccinated and you weren't peg sensitive before, like Harold was saying at the top of the interview, watch out for this because this is coming. You're going to run into PEG somewhere if you're PEG sensitized, if it's a problem. They say it's theoretical, but if it's a problem, these are real life, everyday people, people's moms and dads, daughters, sons, aunts, uncles, grandparents, who are going to all of a sudden, out of the blue, develop anaphylaxis. Tie it in your mind back to the vaccine if you've had vaccines, because you didn't have it before the vaccine and now you have it after the vaccine. You can't sue the vaccine makers. You have to sue the Department of Health and Human Services in the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. It can take 10 years to get a resolution. But if the trigger was some other product, I'm not litigious myself, but if the trigger is some other product, we have to send a message to the industry somehow about these dangerous things that they're putting out there. Look at how people can't bring peanuts into school. So, right, because there might, on the outside chance that there might be a kid that has anaphylaxis to peanut allergy, they can't bring any of these kinds of nuts. And so the same thing in pharmaceutical companies. I don't have a soft part in my heart for pharmaceutical companies that have to retrofit a particular process so they're not killing somebody with anaphylaxis. I think that that's incumbent upon them, if they're going to participate in the market of medicine, that they should make their product as safe as possible. So, Harold, what are your closing thoughts on this, and where can people go for more information? What's the best place of information that you know of?
The best place I found, and forgive me, before I got introduced to you, I wasn't aware of your show. This would be a good place. Children's Health Defense is a wonderful place. They update the stats on the vaccine delivery all the time, and they have multiple articles and have done their own research. So there is a lot of information on CHD, the Defender site, and I would highly recommend. It costs $10 for a lifetime membership. I mean, it's nothing. And the information there is timely and is wonderful, is well researched. They have a bevy of very smart people that they have at their disposal to put this information together and try to get it out to people. So I would recommend highly doing so. And I would recommend calling your representatives and saying this is a problem, needs to be looked into. I finally got a call back from my congressman. He's new there now, Congressman Good. I'll put a good word in for Congressman Good. And his office contacted me, and they are contacting the FDA to talk to them about specifically the problem with polyethylene glycol and possibly reclassifying it. So those are the sources that I would recommend.
That's great, Harold. So people, if you want to get a hold of Harold, write to us at info at, um, I guess I would say info at, which one? I have a couple of places. Well, get a hold of me. Just find me and contact me on social media. If you run a podcast and you want to talk to Harold, let's get him on as many podcasts and get his message out as possible. I'm really appreciative that you took the time to speak out in your comment on the CHD article. I think people should go to that CHD article and read Harold's comment. It's extremely informative. And plus, Harold, I want to thank you for your service to the country. You're a veteran. You saw actual combat service, and I want to tell you, you're standing up for a good number of people now, looking after people's well-being once again. So, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure.
All righty. Well, listen, guys, you heard it here. Go to the Defender. You heard it from Harold. Go to the Defender, read about it. Take everything you know about polyethylene glycol sensitivity. Go to my blog, jameslyons-weiler.com, and you'll find the article where I'm calling for screening, patch testing, something to get people out of harm's way. We cannot expect medicine to continue to be able to just throw people into harm's way without first doing no harm. And of course, if you like what we do here at WWDNYK with the podcast, you can go to patreon.com, WWDNYK, pitch in, throw $1 a month, $2 a month, something like that. It helps us keep the lights on. And Dr. Jack signing out. You are welcome, of course, to contact us with ideas of guests that you think that we should have on the show. I would encourage that as well. So contact executive producer at unbreakingscience.com and send Grace your prospective guests. Dr. James.